So today we are actually going to move to another cut at how to look at the global efforts around this disease. So we're going to turn today to the second challenge. What are the responsive tools, technologies, and the systems that we need to innovate at scale to address this global challenge? Alzheimer's knows no borders, neither can our solutions. So we're going to turn our first global panel this morning on the digital tools that are enabling greater global access to Alzheimer's research, and a special discussion with two cohorts that are involved in that effort in Malaysia and Argentina, who recently joined the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative Cohorts Initiative. Rhoda Oh, professor of anatomy and neurobiology at Boston University, and the long-standing PI involved with the Framingham Heart Study, is going to serve as our opening first panel moderator. Rhoda also serves as the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative's Director of Global Cohort Development. She'll lead this discussion. So Rhoda, thank you for moderating our first panel this morning, recruiting these expert global voices to be with us at Lausanne, and for everything you do to advance global representation and participation in Alzheimer's research. Rhoda, take it away.
Thank you, George. And, it's always really great to be at Lausanne because this is where I think that there's a true representation of the global voice, where we're hearing from people from all over the world. And I think this panel also reflects that. As you noted, we have been launching the DAC Global Cohort Development. We have now 14 cohorts from 12 different countries, with two, very excited that they're represented here. So we see a world without boundaries, which means we work with collaborators wherever they sit. And that's actually well beyond the academic walls, and include all that private industry, from startups to large multinational corporations, and local governments, international organizations such as the World Economic Forum, the World Bank, philanthropic organizations, private investment community, et cetera. Pretty much anyone who has an interest and understanding of the importance of not just brain-related disorders, but brain health in general. And, and also from its earliest developmental phases at infancy to the other end of the age spectrum, and the fastest growing elderly population, which is the centenarians. So, we are embracing and inclusive, and I think that that's also reflected on our panel. One of the things that we need to think about, though, is that, where are we going? We know right now that 90% of our data in this space is collected on 10% of the population. And we really need to now, and moving into the digital realm, really think about how we can embrace dementia, and particularly AD, for all its complexity, and moving away from the sort of the traditional reductionist single solution ideas. So we're trying to do inclusiveness at a scale that never has been done. We are respecting within the global cohort development. We respect individual data sovereignty. That's really important. But we also need to create a global resource and network that will focus on the can'ts and turning them into can. So that we are really good in the research world of identifying lots of things we can't do. And I really think that what we're trying to launch is an initiative that pushes us into the realm of can. So what I'm going to do is now start by having our panelists introduce themselves individually, and then we'll move into having each of them speak about their own work before we move into our discussion. So just to start, Shibishi, can you first get us going by introducing yourself?
Yes, thank you, Rhoda. I'm a neurologist by background, and I have the chance to lead the science of Biogen Digital Health, which is a global group within Biogen dedicated to advance digital and personalized medicine and make this become a reality across neuroscience.
Great. And Ma Pin, can you introduce yourself?
I am Mo Pin Tan. Tan's the surname, and I'm actually a geriatrician at the University of Malaya, and we have a nationwide cohort called the Ageless Longitudinal Study of Aging.
Great, thank you. And Ricardo?
Thank you, Rhoda, and thanks, George, for the invitation. I'm Dr. Ricardo Allegri. I'm professor of neurology in the School of Medicine at the University of Buenos Aires, and I'm the head of cognitive neurology of the Neurological Institute FLENI, Buenos Aires, Argentina, one of the largest neurological institutes in Latin America. I'm very excited to be part of Davos Alzheimer collaboration. We are grateful for the opportunity to be included in this promising worldwide network.
Great. And we're hoping that Yingray will be able to join us from iCarbon Next, but I think we're just going to move on and start out with just a general discussion, starting with Shibashie about the work that you're doing and how it intersects with the, what we're discussing today.
Thank you, Rhoda. Biogen Digital Health is taking the high road in the field of making research in Alzheimer's disease access more patients and probably better measure human cognition in disorders such as AD. We're pursuing, I would say, two major goals when we say digitalizing and personalizing medicine. This starts first by probably transforming measurements of those devastating conditions, which, as you probably know, are currently mostly relying on relatively subjective and rater-based measures that are collected in clinic usually, which implies infrequently and generally lack sensitivity or responsiveness to change. We believe we can change that by digital health technology tools, in particular if we're relying on consumer technologies that are already in people's lives and that could be embedded relatively easily in clinical trials to transform the resolution of how we attempt to quantify human performances. And this is true for cognition and for motion. At Biogen, we are mostly concentrated in advancing therapies in multiple sclerosis, neuromuscular disease, Alzheimer's disease, and other dementias, but also movement disorders. And there is a common denominator to those conditions that are neurodegenerative, which is the disease process is slow, insidious, and the longitudinal pattern of trajectories of progression are generally latent and we believe mostly flying under the radar of the obvious that is captured by the human eye and the observation of the neurologist. There's lots of efforts currently that are using digital tools, as you know, but they're generally cross-sectional. What we're trying to do in a systematic way is embed into interventional trials digital health technology tools, because in essence, if we want to transform the success of drug development by higher resolution measurement, those measurements have to be performing with respect to detecting treatment effect. And there's no better place to develop such metrics than actually embedding technology within trials. There's another goal beyond augmenting our capacity to detect a signal early in drug development and do better decision of going to phase 2 to phase 3, which is also about empowering digital tools to make us better understand disease heterogeneity. And I know in the global cohort of the Davos Alzheimer collaborative effort, this is a priority. That is a priority for us too, to enhance our capacity to enrich the information longitudinally, creating what we call deep phenotyping cohorts, similarly to the DAC effort, that will enable us one day, we hope, if we generate data at scale, to break the code of what makes those diseases, I would say, infinitely heterogeneous, because human cognition per se is of infinite complexity. So any disorders that affect human cognition is of an even higher magnitude of complexity. And if we want to make progress in that space, there's probably only one way, which is going the high road, understanding what at the subject level could enable us to make accurate prediction when it comes to prognostication of disease course at the individual level, which is probably a first step one day to understand what could predict therapy response. Because on a highly heterogeneous disease trajectory background, the assumption is that therapy response, as we see it nowadays in the trials that are ringing out, is also possibly heterogeneous.
Great, thank you very much. And Ma Pin, can you take a few minutes here and really introduce your cohort and how you think it fits into the Davos Collaborative?
Thank you, Rhoda. Yep. So we have a unique cohort in Malaysia. So we initially started as 3 cohorts. So when we first applied for the grant, it was actually to merge 2 cohorts. That was the towards unusual aging, the Tua cohort. Tua is old in Malay, and the Malo cohort, the Malaysian Elders Longitudinal Research, which were funded by separate grants, but were intended to be complementary and to inform each other. So the Tua cohort was actually recruited through our sampling frame, through sampling frames, quite traditional. And then the Malo cohort, for the first time in, I suppose, a developing country, we actually tried electoral roll sampling. And then ours was a very geographically specific cohort concentrated around the university hospital, because that means that we could actually utilize all the facilities in the hospital, such as retinal pictures, and also reduce the traveling costs, but get as much information as possible from 3 main ethnic groups. So the main focus of the cohort, if you like, was actually to look at ethnic comparisons. And we recruited 1,500 individuals, equal, stratified by ethnicity. And we have 3 main ethnicities in Asia. So that's the ethnic Malays, which is the majority racial group in Malaysia. But we also have 500 ethnic Chinese, and these people mostly migrated from southern China within the last 100 years, and then also 500 ethnic Indians, and these were mainly Tamil speaking, and actually emigrated from Tamil Nadu mainly, but some came from Kerala and other places over the last 100 years as well. So that gave us very unique ethnic comparisons. We were able to obtain a blood sample at the inception of the cohort in 2013, and these blood samples had been stored in -80. And then we obtained detailed social demographic lifestyle information, as well as tested cognition. Okay, I'll come to cognition in a short while. So let's just move to the Tua cohort. The Tua cohort was actually a nationally representative cohort, kind of recruited in the traditional way of sampling frames from 4 states in West Malaysia. So Malaysia has two sides to it, East and West. And the East Malaysia, actually, you have to fly across the South China Sea, and it's North Borneo. So we only managed West Malaysia, and it was already challenging enough. That recruited nearly 3,000 individuals, for which there were some stored blood samples, and there was the main focus of that cohort was actually mild cognitive impairment. So when it came to the cognitive assessment tools, we had a huge challenge. So when the cohorts were conceived, the only validated cognitive assessment tool in Malaysia was the MMSE. And we needed it in at least 4 languages. And at that time, none of this was translated to Tamil. But luckily, as the cohorts went on, MOCA was actually validated in the Malay, translated and validated in the Malay language. But we're still very limited when it comes to validated cognitive assessment tools. And remember, in the cohorts itself, we actually have to have English, Malay, Mandarin, Chinese, and fortunately for Chinese, it might be all written in the same same characters, but we have lots of dialects, and most of our older people speak dialects rather than Mandarin Chinese. And then we have also to use Tamil, but not all our ethnic Indians speak Tamil. Some of them would speak Malayalam, and some of them would actually be from Punjabi. So we had a huge language challenge when it came to actually validated assessment tools, and hence the cognitive assessments in these cohorts have produced a lot of noise. So the range by which we have to use to actually detect cognitive impairment is very huge. So we have people who have an MMSE of 30 and clearly seem to have not be functioning too well cognitively, and then people with an MMSE of 18 who actually do not have dementia, their function absolute preservation in function. And with MOCA, there's a huge element of cultural and ethnic cultural and educational bias. We're still trying to tease out what to do with MOCA. MMSE is actually simpler to handle. So we haven't quite sussed out MOCA yet, but from what we can see, there's actually a clear ethnic difference in MOCA performance. Basically, it actually is very culturally biased, how different cultures actually think. And in MOCA, we actually have a very much lower score in the ethnic Malays and a much higher score in the ethnic Chinese. So to make comparisons is actually extremely challenging. So we have kind of validated another MCI tool from Singapore, which is totally picture-based. That's called the VIII, that we're trying to apply to the cohort now. And then we have simpler tools called the IDEA tool that it was actually adapted from Africa that we've used as a screening tool for the National Health and Morbidity Survey. But all this is work in progress. And for any tools in Malaysia, 4 languages is not enough, because we're just dealing with West Malaysia at this moment. When we move across to East Malaysia, we literally have to have it translated to 100 different languages, some of which do not actually have any written language. So how on earth we actually achieve that would be a huge challenge. So we actually have to move to newer ways. And why do we want to bother with paper-based tools when we actually have modern technology? So with Malaysia, we're very unique in the sense that the smartphone ownership is around about 200% penetration. So most people own at least two devices, most people don't have landlines anymore, and in a lot of the we call them orang asli, natural people villages. They've kind of moved straight to mobile phones. They've never had landlines. So that's actually suddenly connected a lot of the country. And so, why bother with trying to validate and translate tools when we can actually move straight to digital cognitive phenotyping tools? So we're really, really looking forward to this sort of collaboration that will really be a great leap forward when we actually come to look at cognitive impairment, because even the definition of dementia in Malaysia is not workable. Because we'll have to have cognitive impairment with functional loss. But in our culture, people lose function not because of cognitive impairment. They lose function because the sons got married and the daughter-in-law now takes over all the housework and the cooking. So we have huge issues in determining whether someone actually really has loss of function. And we still have very, very traditional cultures where the man never did any laundry, wouldn't know how to do anything in the kitchen. So to actually detect any cognitive functional impairment in this group is also highly challenging. So there's a lot of work that we can potentially benefit, and hopefully that will extend beyond digital phenotyping into actually genetic work as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Ricardo, can you tell us about the FLENI cohort and your work?
Okay, thanks, Rhoda. Yes, our cognitive department at FLENI, current flow 1,000 patients with cognitive impairment or dementia every month. In our cohort, we perform a clinical multimodal approach for early diagnosis and prevention in patients with mild cognitive impairment and dementia. And this multimodal approach includes a cognitive assessment, brain MRI scan, and all the Alzheimer biomarker in cerebrospinal fluids and brain PET scan. We also keep blood and CSF sample in our fluids bank. We save this fluid to perform study later. No, I would like to describe several topics that explain the importance of Davos Scientific Network around the world and the VIII role. First, it's crucial to organize this network not only in developed countries, but also in emerging ones to increase inclusion and diversity. This network will provide the opportunity for dementia centers like VIII in emerging countries to grow and develop. Referring to the network, I would like to point out the importance of working with big data from diverse countries that collaborate with their particular culture. The network will also generate greater technological equality for many health centers. The first network is the starting point for testing scientific developments such as blood biomarker and digital technology. However, later on, it can connect to other networks indefinitely in order to optimize the use of the digital research. As I say, this connectivity allows emerging centers in emerging countries to develop and grow scientifically. That was our experience in VIII 10 years ago when we contacted Dr. Maria Carrillo from Alzheimer's Association with the purpose of wishing to collaborate with ADNI, the Alzheimer's Disease Neuroimaging Initiative, and later with DIAN, Dominantly Inherited Alzheimer's Network. Both networks were organized to study Alzheimer's patients with neuropsychological tests not only translate in Spanish, but also harmonized and adapted to our country. We had also the possibility to develop AD biomarker regularly tested with a higher quality standard. Thanks to her support, we have gained the knowledge and clinical systematization to study the patient, and we are able today to use both biomarkers for Alzheimer's disease in CSF and PET scans in South America. The importance of digital technology was clearly reflected in the COVID pandemic. Thanks to the digital research we have at VIII, we were able to carry on with our daily activity. As you know, Argentina endured the longest lockdown and one of the strictest, a total of over 200 days. Despite this, we developed telemedicine, teleneuropsychological assessment, and even cognitive training online to continue assisting our patients. The experience of the COVID lockdown generates new challenges. At the present, we are working to develop the application for the smartphone and iPad in order to monitor our patients, the physical exercise, heart rate, blood pressure. The instant information allows us to contact the patient immediately. And finally, with a sample cognitive exercise, we can collect information from the patient, and we could know the progression of the disease and how it's responded to medication. We are very excited to be part of Davos Alzheimer collaboration because I believe that is a very promising worldwide network with all the characteristics, with the possibility of digital results and the possibility to characterize the phenotype of our patient.
Great. Thank you very much. This was all great. I do want to sort of mention that we're hoping that with the Malaysian and the Argentinian cohorts that you're going to be able to start launching your digital phenotyping through the global cohort development in the coming month or so. So we're very excited about sort of that moving forward and in partnership with the two of you. So so this really sort of moves us into the discussion section. And I know people are already posting questions on the chat. So I encourage people to continue to do that. And just to start out with, Shibasha, there's a question specific about the Biogen Apple study. And if you could talk about what you know in terms of the timing of the insights and milestones that you would expect from that study.
Yes, so as you probably heard, we entered a very ambitious, I would say, expedition, starting a collaboration with Apple and a study called Intuition, a virtual effort attempting to test a very simple hypothesis. This started in September this year, which is about evaluating whether or not using processed features from purely passively collected information derived from the way we interact with our iPhone and Apple Watch, you can actually derive potential metrics that could tell us something about our cognitive wellness, derived scores that could actually make us understand how our brain is healthy across the age span. This is a large-scale 2-year observational study that's gathering passive information for approximately 20,000 adults across the age span, but also collecting similar information from patients with various phenotypes of early cognitive complaints or mild cognitive impairments. This is also testing using as an anchor high-frequency conventional but digitalized cognitive outcome assessment testing, whether over time potential scores derived from pure passive digital information could actually detect change in cognitive performances, healthy aging or accelerated aging and potential MCI stage. This is an ambitious experiment that we believe is matching our intent to go after behavioral patterns that may probably stem the earliest possible stages of the disease prior to the diagnostic stage. We believe, and this is no news, that the translation of alteration of human cognition into behavior is certainly something that can be approached and captured by passive information. However, we've got to be humble at the intersection of those rich data sets versus a certain level of ground truth. The generation of potential promising measurement will demand, I would say, formidable analytical efforts. It is, I would say, a plea that we make to the field not to simplify how complex it is going to be. There is currently a bit of a proliferation on inflated expectation with respect to how easy it could be to capture signals. We believe we can get somewhere. It is interesting to go that route because it enables obviously signals to be derived for obviously something that's going to be language, education, and culture agnostic, using instruments that is already in people's life. I'm very fascinated by the Malaysia 200% smartphone penetration. So if you think about this experiment, if it was to be positive, that could completely transform the way we go after detection of the earliest possible signs of pre-symptomatic or early symptomatic Alzheimer's disease.
Yep, that's great. I really love the use of the word expedition, because I think that that really fully captures where we're headed. This is not about peer-reviewed science, but it's really about moving forward in ways that we hadn't thought. I also wanted to sort of highlight your comments about behavioral patterns as really maybe a more accurate indicator of cognition, because I always like to remind everybody we do everything through our brain. So we're always reflecting our cognitive capabilities as we move about our environment. So I think that that's really great. And I really love the ambition because, you know, in the US, as you know, with the Obama administration, we set this target of 2025. And what's amazing to me is back then, it just seemed like a pipe dream. And today we have at least, you know, one and a whole pipeline of actual potential treatments that are going to emerge over the course of this next year or so, and well on target for that. So I think it's good to set these high ambitions and then put some stakes in the ground. So I'm sorry. So Ma-Pin, there's actually a question for you related to, they would like more information related to the picture-based screening tool that you had mentioned. If you could describe that a little bit more, that would be great in terms of what
Yeah, so the picture-based screening tool that we adopted was actually a very simple one that was actually validated by Joe Vergests and his team in Kerala in India. So just 4 pictures, and then they're supposed to, so a monkey or and a bracelet and a bicycle. And so then if they couldn't identify those items straight away after a period of distraction, then you would actually give them a cue. So there's screening tests, but there's actually also a visual tool that we've done for MCI that's actually been validated. We've validated across Southeast Asia with that was developed by actually Singapore, the National Neurological Institute, called the Visual Cognitive Assessment Tool, and that mirrors the MMSC, the MMSC and the MOCA in that the total number of points is 30, and it really works through all the domains, but only uses pictures. So you would actually administer it in the person's own language. So as long as you have an administrator who knows the same language as the patient, then you could actually administer the test. And it's quite gender balanced in a sense, because, you know, for men you'll be asking them which way the gears are turning. So and then for the women, more of the, what can you name as many vegetables as you can. You know, it's quite strange in Malaysia, but a lot of men eat the vegetables without knowing what they're called. So because they don't do the marketing. So then we have a very nice spectrum of scores, and it's really lovely because the cutoff for MCI is 18. So we can even use it as which makes it. And it seems to be quite sensitive to change. So we've just also looked at a detection of progression, because the other problem we have about MOCA, but specifically, is the learning effect that doesn't seem to be also present in the VCAT as well. But what would be really nice if this VCAT could then be made into a digital form, such that, you know, you could actually be administered as a screening tool anywhere in the, you know, deep in the jungles of East Malaysia, because a large part of East Malaysia is still rural.
Great, thank you so much. Ricardo, you know, you have actually, I think, had a lot of success with your Fleming cohort. But what do you see are still the hurdles that you face, you know, more broadly in the Latin America region that we really need to be aware of? Can you comment on sort of what you see as sort of some of the considerations that are barriers that you think that we might still need to be thinking about?
Yes. In emerging country, we need to consider several points that may threaten the success of the project. We need to know what happened with the phone. We need to know, for example, what happened with internet. and what's the level of education of the medical doctor and the specialist. This is very important to know the situation to work with our core, because we need all this part to this point for the exit for the possibility of the cohort. Related with the funds, in developing country like Latin American country, the funds for research are scarce. As example, in Argentina, one local grant for research from the government now is $50,000 per year. As you know, it's not possible to be researching AD biomarker with this grant. It's impossible, and we need to apply for international grant. As example, in our department, we participate in the Young TU project with NIH support, and we launched 1 month ago the LATAM Finger project, one prevention project supported by Alzheimer Association. And we need to look this fund for the possibility to work in our country. The second difficulty could be the internet, because in some part of the country, in some region of the country, the internet had some limitation, and we need to know this limitation, and we need to work with the limitation. What happened with the specialists? For the specialists from Latin America is not complicated, because most of them do have a certain training as they have studied abroad in developed country, most in USA or Europe. So this not seem to be significant difficult to work with a specialist, no? However, as a good example, in our LATAM Finger project, we organized several training for the specialists, several training for the people who will work in the project, and the project is okay, we can work. Finally, beyond all the difficulty, is good news integrate the emerging country through the global research of dementia. I think that the result is going to be very promising, with the possibility to integrate the developing countries.
Great. And then just as a follow-up question, what's the relationship between your work in the, the worldwide finger studies and your biomarker work? Where do you see that? Yeah.
Yes. We work, we coordinate. LATAM Finger is a work between 13 countries from Latin America. And we organize this network, and this is very important for the Latin American Center, because we work together with the same objective, and we train together, and we have the possibility to work in prevention. For Latin America, or for the developed countries, it's very important, the prevention, because we have more risk factor than developed country. We have more hypertension, more diabetes, more low education, and one project like LATAM Finger is very important, and I think that the result will be very, very interesting for our country. I believe that LATAM Finger is the first network in Latin America, and I believe that is a good start to work with different countries from our region.
Great, thank you. Shipashu, can you talked briefly about sort of this, you actually mentioned the idea of passive data collection. So can you elaborate further on the types of modalities that that these digital tools can be used from a passive perspective, because I think that much of the technologies, as you know, today are more active engagement. So if you could comment on, what are these other digital health tools that really help you move that forward into the passive realm, and how that could really transform our research.
Yes, thanks for that. That's a very critical point. So we're first of all not ignoring any path. So as much as we're attempting to test the hypothesis that pure passively connected information actually could contain some disease truths when it comes to human cognition and change over time. We're also not ignoring the capacity to combine the processed feature from the passive space to label the annotated information collected from ActiveCast, because again, when it comes to translate complex sensor-derived passive digital data into human activity pattern recognition without some sort of ground truth, this is a largely blinded expedition. But the domains that we're the most interested in, I would say, are the dimension that we know we may be more objectively measuring. If you think about, for instance, the complex motor behavior, such as gait or voice and speech, or the way we communicate through keystroke dynamics by typing in our smartphones, these are largely activities that, although potentially collected passively, are easily relatable to how we can understand the way to best design rich features in an active task. So, for instance, you probably do a better job creating the type of features that will optimally capture unique individual longitudinal patterns from a passive data set, if at the same time for the same individual you have the gait active windows of assessment. Same for voice and speech. Similar is true for the keystroke typing. Combination of active task to the passive monitoring data collection effort will actually augment the probability of success of creating context in the passive data set that will potentially make the larger data space, because the passive dimension is mostly variable because it's containing totality of the longitudinal picture, especially for wrist-worn technology. But we have to bear in mind what the passive digital features are mostly good at is at detecting motion, and how do you go from motion behavior to recognition of specific patterns of behavior that could be seen in early AD will demand a lot of human activity pattern recognition research in laboratory in parallel to those longitudinal efforts that are just starting now. Intuition study with Apple is going to be a long expedition, as I said. We've got to do all of those parallel efforts if one day we can hope harvesting from those data set something that could become a reality for clinical trial signal detection or for screening in population-based effort across geographies, signs of potential early cognitive impairment.
Great. So I think that we all agree that, in order to move down this path, we're really going to have to collect a fair amount of data. We're going to have to large numbers of people. And of course, our goal is to do this globally so that we get a real so that we get solutions that really reflect the world population rather than. So one of the things, as we know, is that the populace, the global populace overall, it's uneven as to, what is the understanding of brain-related disorders, and particularly dementia and AD. So I'm very curious from Ma-Pin and Ricardo's standpoint of where do they think within their country the understanding of the diseases in general, and how do they think digital technologies could actually play a role in helping to, I guess, enlarge the scope of knowledge within the general population. So maybe Ma-Pin, if you could comment on that.
Yeah, it's a huge challenge because even our medical schools don't teach anything about older people in general, let alone dementia. And our postgraduate students are going around, trying to validate tools and to actually refine the tools, as well as to actually look at risk factors, et cetera, et cetera. But then the panels that actually examine these postgraduate students don't even understand anything about cognitive assessment tools, let alone being able to examine these students, and they have huge issues. So and that almost puts the students off actually doing studies in that area. So we have huge issue if doctors don't understand this disease, where do we start? And so we have to educate people in the next 10 years, because we've already started aging, and by 2030, our older population would have doubled. And the number of people with dementia more than doubled, because the fastest growing segment of society is of course the over 80s. And so we have to really engage with other people to actually accelerate the education of our healthcare professional as well as our general population, because otherwise it's almost like swimming against the tide. So we can't even stop people from doing operations on people with really advanced dementia, because they don't understand that this is dementia. They actually think that this is normal part of aging. So then, they don't do cognitive assessments, let alone functional assessments. So we have, in my ward today, I have someone who's had, bilateral BKAs done, and then after that, the whole family are having to actually spend a lot of time looking after this older person, because there was really no chance of him actually rehabilitating and actually, let alone putting on prosthesis. But nobody had actually embarked on the operation without people have actually embarked in the operation without knowing that this person actually had undiagnosed dementia. So the huge issues, and really without external collaboration, I don't know that we will be able to actually educate this population. So the Davos collaboration will be very vital. If anything, it just pushes us up that, gives us that visibility, and makes it look like our work actually does matter, and gives us a limelight to actually push the agenda further.
Great, thank you. Ricardo, you have some comments? Yep.
Yes, I agree. I believe that the most important thing is work in education. We have the same difficulty in our country. We have the same difficulty in all Latin America. Most of the people don't know about dementia, don't know about cognitive impairment. The doctor don't know very well what happened with the cognitive impairment in the elderly people. I believe that we need to educate the population, and we need to work at the university, because in all the career of a medical doctor, the dementia subject is only 1 or 2 hours in the 6 years of the career of the training of one doctor. And I believe that the epidemiology of the dementia is enormous, and we can now train the doctor with only 1 or 2 hours in all the career. I believe that we need to work in the pre-medical learning. We need to work in the specialty. We need to educate the specialists, most the geriatrician, the psychiatric. We have we had a small problem in our country because the psychiatrists are psychoanalysts. A lot of psychiatric in Argentina had psychoanalysts, and this is a problem for the knowledge of dementia. I believe that is a huge challenge to work in education.
Great. Now, we have another question, which I think, Shivashree, you might be able to address. The question is, what do you think are the attrition levels like for digital home-based assessment? And is it important to have sort of a hybrid site and home-based model? And I'm curious to see what you think.
Yeah, that's an interesting question that we're starting to unravel across efforts, industry or academic-based. I think it is likely to be test and requested contribution, but also disease dependent, very largely. For instance, I would say in Alzheimer's disease, this is really early days of longitudinal effort of deep digital phenotyping, passive and active across different modalities, frequencies of administration. But for instance, in other disease areas, such as in particular multiple sclerosis and Parkinson's disease, that are largely different type of population affected by those radically different diseases. It is already obvious that people living with Parkinson's disease, for instance, that by definition are largely affected by symptomatic fluctuation on the motor side of things that they experience day to day, and that have already as part of their life from in-clinic visit to in-clinic visit, the request by their neurologist to fill in diaries with their perception or let's say experience of motor fluctuation. A population like people living with Parkinson's disease are rather welcoming as a gift the capacity to self-contribute to their objective measures, even with high-frequency active testing. And there are like a few trials that are reading out now that are really showing surprising adherence in this particular population. If on the other end of the spectrum, you think about young adults diagnosed with multiple sclerosis that are aiming to probably live a normal active life for the next decades and forget about their chronic neurological condition, they will develop a completely different relationship to the invitation to self-monitor their disease. In Alzheimer's disease, that's again another space that we're just entering. We also have to bear in mind that the story is not written with respect, depending on the use case and the time of target disability concepts of interest, what is going to be the appropriate frequency when it comes to active testing paradigm out of clinic, more ecological in free living environment that is optimal to detect change and increase power in clinical trial. It might very well be again that high frequency may mean monthly or quarterly burst of 4 or 5 days of repetitive task. This is an area currently that we and others are trying to simulate. And again, we're at early days of being a bit more systematic, testing those instruments in trials, and we have a lot to learn with respect to reception and recipe for technology adoption in real life condition as well as in clinical trials.
Yeah, I agree. I think that what's going to happen is that, starting with our Malaysian and Argentina cohorts, we're going to start to find out what is that adoption rate and how well will they be consistent. One thing to mention is, we're embarking at least initially on a 2-year longitudinal, higher frequency data collection. So I think maybe next year we'll be able to answer this question a little bit better. So I think that this has been a great discussion, and I want to wrap up very quickly with this idea that now we need to think about where we're going from here. And I think that, to me, it's the number one thing we need to do is we need to accelerate growth of this this global effort, right? So we need to expand the base of our cohort. So to the Lausanne community, if you have collaborators that you think would be interested, we need the base of collaborators for cohorts. We need it for funding support. We need it in every direction in order to move this forward. You know, we started out the Davos Global Cohort Initiative, just to let you know, we started out with a goal of bringing in 4 to 6 cohorts and hopefully, starting to phenotype 2,400 to 6,000 participants. It turns out that we exceeded our initial goal. We went over 200% over our goal for the number of cohorts that signed on, and we actually went over 400% for our participants. But you know what? I don't think that's really our accomplishment. It's just an indicator of how great the need is and how much the field is really feeling this need to go forward. And so what we need to do, we need to not think about what we have done. We need to continue to worry about what we still need to do, because what the need is still outstripping whatever accomplishments we've had. So there's no laurels to rest on. And we need to feverishly, I like to use that word feverishly, continue to build the global cohort and the infrastructure needed to it. And we also need to democratize the data in order to allow the scientific community to turn all our cans into cans. So my call to action is that we need to keep feeling the urgency because there are people today and there's going to be people tomorrow who are identified every day who have to confront the devastating consequences of the disease. We have an aspirational goal of 1 million over the next 5 years, but I want to remind us that's not enough because we have a world population of 7.9 billion. And so I want to make sure that we always keep that bigger number in our sight. So we have an ambitious framework within the Davos Initiative. This panel, I thank you for coming together and helping us launch this initiative. And I want to remind everybody who's listening that there's no one that doesn't have something to effort. So my call to action is for all of us to act quickly and to do it in any way we can. With that, I'm going to turn it back. Thank you again.
Thank you, Rhoda, for that fascinating panel and the work that's going on in Malaysia and in Argentina and with Biogen globally. As Rhoda has mentioned, our goal at the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative, the partnership between the Global CEOI and the World Economic Forum, is 1 million people with well-characterized risk for dementia to be followed through time as a base, because our charge when we were formed was demonstrate that we can, in the next 5 years, develop a path that points to an elaboration of the biomarkers and the detection capability that we could demonstrate we could do. That is going to advance the field globally. The global population, as Rhoda has noted, is large and growing, most of whom are outside the range of current scientific investigation, and where if we can use digital technology and blood for DNA and fecal material for the rest of the omics, and do it in a standardized way and do it with high quality data linked through data sharing mechanisms and biorepository systems accessible to the global scientific world, that in fact we can enable Malaysia and enable Argentina, enable other cohorts in other parts of the world and other scientists in other parts of the world to have the same potential tools as high resource countries have today. And to be able to respond to the challenges in their societies. It's a powerful vision. It's a huge mission. And as a number of these participants have indicated, I guess it was Shibashu's, we're off on an expedition here, a bit into the unknown. And while there's obviously some risk of going for something to the unknown. There's a much greater risk of not going to a global approach to scientific investigation and cohort development. We 2/3 of the prevalence of this disease is now outside of what we think of as the high resource countries, and it will grow in time as the populations in low and middle income countries grow more rapidly than that in the high resource countries. And we are not responsible, mission-related, patient-oriented people if we don't take account of the total population around the world that is at risk for this disease and address it, even in the face of widespread ignorance that this is in fact a disease. But with leaders, as you've seen on this panel, people are willing to march into the unknown, believing that in fact we're going to make discoveries and that we are going to be able to address this problem at a global level. Rhoda is our leader on this expedition at the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative, heading up this cohorts project. And she, because of her interest in digital technologies through her work with the Framingham Initiative, is the perfect guide as we move forward. We're not going to ignore imaging where imaging is available and accessible, but by and large, to reach the populations that we've seen described in Malaysia, imaging is simply not feasible. In the traditional high resource country, limited access, radiological methodologies are simply not available. So we have to solve this problem differently. And as Rhoda is frequently saying, we can't just replicate what we do today in another form. We have to think completely differently. Or as probably Steve Jobs would say, think different. So thank you, Rhoda, for that panel and basically starting us off on this expedition, as we'll report on it every year at Lausanne, and we'll report every year on it at the Davos annual meeting in January in the city of Davos.